Hello, Tom, Jay, Amy. Thank you so much for being here.
Our pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Lubna.
Perfect. So we are here to discuss our VOA survey, Voice of the Advisor, and some of the interesting insights that we were able to surface. But before we get to that, please take a moment to introduce yourselves. Tom, we can start with you.
Hi, my name's Tom Hayko. I've been with CGI for almost 31 years now, through a whole bunch of background, and I'm the leader of the architecture practice within our Global Wealth and Capital Markets team.
Hi, Jay Thakore. I've been in the financial services industry for about 22 years, and currently I lead a team that's responsible for implementation of our intellectual property products and solutions globally.
I'm Aimee Mendez, not to date myself like these guys, but I've been doing UX design and strategy for 20 years. Currently, I lead the user experience design group for global wealth and capital markets, but most of my experience really is in the financial and telecommunications industries.
Perfect. So this is the third episode in our Voice of the Advisor series, and I'm very happy to do it with all of you here. We're going to dive a bit into some of the more technical areas and how we can achieve some of the solutions that our advisors are asking for. Before we get started, just provide a bit of context for those that are not aware of our Voice of the Advisor survey or have not watched the previous two episodes. So I encourage everyone to do so. Voice of the Advisor is our survey that we put out into the marketplace for advisory teams, because at CGI we have our digital wealth platform, which is a solution for advisors. However, we realized that we never really got to hear from advisors on what they want and what they're looking for. And so we wanted to make sure that we build technologies that will meet the demands of the market, and we wanted to get the information firsthand from the advisory teams. And so we launched the survey. It's been great. This is our second year, and some really fascinating insights came out this year. So in the previous two episodes, we discussed the main things that our advisors are looking for. The top three are integration between technologies, streamlining of core processes such as onboarding, and then streamlining of investment management processes. So in this conversation, we're really going to discuss how we get to that from a technology perspective, and what are some of the things that firms need to do in order to provide those experiences for their clients. So I'll start with you, Tom, since you are our architecture person here. Advisors want streamlining. We know firms want to provide it. How did they get started on this journey?
So I think probably the biggest thing from a technology perspective is to start working on breaking their processes and their products, their applications that are supporting their processes down into smaller pieces that can be used independently and plugged together into different types of processes as the processes evolve, and allowing that integration, because the point of entry is so much smaller rather than just a whole monolithic system with a user interface in front of it.
Absolutely. And so if they're to go on that journey, well, first of all, we know that they already have a lot of different systems that they use, right? They don't have I guess what you would call an end-to-end process where the advisor can do every single thing they need to do within this one platform, right? Or platformization, as we've all been calling it for the past little while. So since they already have this, like, what are they missing?
So I think the big thing that's really missing is the ability to expose those different pieces that are potentially sitting in different systems today into something that can be knit together into a common user experience, a common process that can be managed at one level and dealt with as an integral whole.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Tom, because what we see going on in the industry is the maturity of where clients are, and some clients that have newer businesses have the opportunity to have new technologies that can have less dependence on that legacy infrastructure. And some of the other clients we see have legacy technology that is evolving, and therein lies a need for having that interconnectivity. And so we've actually seen, and you see the resurgence in or the surgence in robo advisory and that type of business, and they're able to move very quickly because they don't have that legacy technology debt that they're trying to work through.
Right. So the fintechs, I think about Wealthsimple, for instance. They're relatively new, and they came out and they had a very easy process to onboard a client. I remember I opened up a Wealthsimple account and I was able to do it within 5 minutes. Didn't have to leave the house. Everything was digital, and it was great. And so we've been having these conversations about how do you bring that type of experience to a wealth management firm for let's say, one of the big six who have been around for a very long time. They have obviously they're behemoths and they have a lot of assets, and also like a lot of different technologies that are sort of stitched together.
It's really the integration, like you talked about earlier, that enables that in the companies with a little bit more of a legacy piece. The companies like Wealthsimple can be really targeted and say, this is the information I need to capture. I'm going to capture that in one coherent step that's consistent with the rest of the process that I actually want to deal with, and they don't have to deal with that legacy piece that's sitting in some back end system that's very hard to decompose or very hard to get a point of entry into without a mass of information or requirements that actually are not really necessary for the specific process that you're actually dealing with.
Right. And so if you're trying to stitch them together, right, creating that connective tissue to have sort of, well, I guess we're back to platformization at that point, because platformization really is the connective tissue between these different systems so that it seems like a seamless experience, even though you may be using 5 or 6 different technologies.
Yeah, it's a bit of the microservices approach where you have a common way of talking to all of that functionality that you can use from any other place to actually deal with those systems, or those pieces of functionality, depending on what level of maturity you're at, and actually pulling that together is really the key.
Absolutely. And I would think that another important part of this, of course, is data. Especially when we talk about integration, a big part of that is data. And how do you get all that data to flow through seamlessly?
So it's really the pieces, those microservices, each being discrete and dealing with the data that they need, and being able to talk to each other through that fabric, of actually being able to exchange information with other pieces, that don't necessarily need all of that same information that's required in that particular domain, to actually be able to move that back and forth, and integrate those things together, to make those processes work well.
Yeah, data it's interesting to see where we have seen the ecosystem for data. Clients are looking for that holistic view of the customer, being able to understand all the different data points within the organization, and the ability to use those microservices to have a standardized platform for the data set you need, and being able to connect those when you need it. I think that's one of the challenges that we've seen as well is it's not just a matter of taking all that data and storing it in one location. It is what type of information does each system or each journey need, user journey need, and how they can use that. And so that's really critical to integration when we talk about the microservices and how we're pulling that from different systems that our clients will have, right, that you see in the industry.
Absolutely. So it sounds like in order for any of this to work, you need to have a really good data strategy. So based on what I've heard, and I am not a techie at all, so not overly knowledgeable about it, but it seems like firms have all this data, but they don't have the right data strategy, right? They're not really using it appropriately. So what are some of the challenges there? Why aren't they able to use it properly, or what needs to be done from their side?
I think there's a couple of areas that they can look at. This comes from the evolution of having different systems that would store data, and then getting to an environment that we see now where each of these systems are not standalone, they're connected. And so it evolves from having data in different areas and now realizing that that data needs to move into different components. And so typically what we see is how you get from a disparate data sources into a cohesive strategy, making sure that you have the right data integrity. So often you'll see that there'll be data in different areas, there'll be duplicates, there'll be different processes that are working that are using data in different aspects. And so without having that overall strategy of what type of data I need, when do I need to use it, it's very difficult to get to that endpoint. So I would say to get there, the first step is absolutely looking at what are all the different data sources you have and understanding what type of data you need to drive the insights you want, right? Insights from an AI or from a customer perspective, or even, we talk about personalization, right? And I think that's a key aspect of what you need to do.
I think there's also a bit of a philosophy shift there as well. When you have data in legacy systems or large monolithic systems, you think of that as being owned by one particular system or set of processes. As you start to break that down and expose that data in different ways, in smaller increments or smaller pieces, you get away a little bit from that idea that that particular system or that particular process is the owner of that data. They're really the steward of that data, but it's used across a bunch of different areas where it makes sense to be pulled in, and that's sort of the philosophy shift that I think needs to happen, particularly in organizations that have longer life products that are supporting them, and that's where that componentization, platformization comes in. You break that down. The data has a steward, but not really so much an owner. It's a custodian of the data that's used by wherever it's actually necessary from.
Absolutely. And so you have the data, and then obviously making sure that it's collected properly and then bucketed appropriately for each of these systems is key here. But I do wonder, like, if I think about a large firm that's been around, for decades, for instance, who's very data rich, and now they're trying to meet market demands. And you brought up personalization, Jay, which is very big in the marketplace. Clients want personalized experiences. They want meaningful interactions. Now, how do some of these firms even get started on that when they have like terabytes of data that's just sitting there collecting dust?
So really, I mean, there's a saying in the IT industry: "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." You start with your monoliths.
Saying.
It is. It's a
Never
bad
heard of
one,
it.
but elephants don't taste very good.
Sorry.
Sorry. The goal or one of the goals in those systems where you've got terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data is to start understanding what data you actually have and where else it might be useful. And that second part is probably actually even less important than understanding what data you need to expose. So you expose that data, whether it's through microservices, whether or not it's through streaming technologies, or whether or not it's just through, sort of some of the older data exposure techniques like data access through database connections or files or things like that. You actually take that data, and as soon as you start being able to expose it, you start to unlock the value in different processes that aren't necessarily managed by the systems where it's captured today. And that's really sort of the big piece. Start building those interfaces, start building the ways to get that data and use it in different contexts that I think are the most important.
Yeah, and we see it in the products that are available in the industry, even including some of the other products, even the products that we have, and the ability to actually use some of the tools out there from an AI perspective to be able to source that data, see behavioral trends, and be able to then pull that back to advisors or clients in the front end to help them with their journey. We saw that in the survey results. People are looking for personalization. They are looking for, are there suggestions that advisors can provide for clients as they continue their life journey and their financial needs?
Yeah, and we saw this with the advent of COVID, right? It seems like overnight firms just started scrambling to accelerate their digital transformation, just to be able to bring that personalization experience to clients. And Tom, you mentioned when it comes to data, context is important. It's the same with creating these personalized user experiences, because we cannot just look at it as, we cannot just use a broad brush to paint or to design these wealth management tools. We have to like really differentiate these use different user goals and their paths or the flows that will get them to get to that particular data. At least from a user experience standpoint, we have to look at it that way as well.
Absolutely. Personalization is definitely, an area that's gained a lot of traction, as we mentioned earlier. And it was really brought on because you have, your Netflix and your Google and your Amazon that's constantly just giving you very meaningful products or just updates on you. For instance, I'll get news on Google that Google knows I'm interested in receiving, right? So it feels like, okay, this is a meaningful interaction. It's not just like some random thing that's being generated for me. And that has moved over to the wealth management industry, where clients expect this personalization from pretty much every aspect of their life, because they're like, well, I know that you have this data on me. I know you're collecting all this information from me. Now, what are you doing with it, and how is it going to benefit me?
So really, I mean, that's a great opportunity. Once that data is actually unlocked and exposed, as Jay mentioned, you start pulling that into machine learning capabilities, AI capabilities that start driving insight and relationships between that data and behavior that other clients have, and you can actually start looking at how that actually drives different outcomes from an investment performance perspective, from a client satisfaction perspective, from a amount of touch required to actually work with customers, and how to make the most effective use of that time.
Yeah, it's one of the areas that we see a lot of is around how a lot of our clients, especially for end users of wealth management services, how can we give them those insights to have that more personalized service? So we've seen things on attrition. Advisors want to know, what is the attrition rate they're going to see from some of their clients. That's some interesting statistics that they can then be able to look at and say, how can I prevent that? Is there things I need to look at? How can I be able to provide more affinity to services that clients across a different segment may have, right? The traditional view, I think, of clients was based on asset value. And that is completely turning upside down. And we're saying asset value is just one dimension of the data we have, but we can actually now segment clients into much more granular groups that we can help provide service to at a different level.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting that you guys have brought this up. In our previous episode with Brian and Malik, we spoke about data insights and NBA, or next best action, because that is something that that advisors want now, right? They want to be able to have I guess sort of like a cheat sheet, right? Okay, like what do I need to focus on for today? So AI and artificial learning and ML machine learning are a big part of this. And all of that goes back to, again, data. Like, how do you collect it and then how do you use it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the real power, or one of the real powers of that data, once you start unlocking it, is that you can start feeding it into those models and refine and have those models refine themselves over time, to drive that insight, to actually make those suggestions in terms of Lubna is going to do this next, or Tom is interested in that next, to actually help guide the advisor to make that interaction with the individual a lot more meaningful.
Yeah, and it goes to the standardization of the microservices. So when we do implementations for our clients, and we see what's happening in the industry with implementations for our clients, the actual product that they take is just a portion of what they need. It's really around the integration to the various systems. We spend a lot of time in working on the interface files and the interface specifications of how they can actually integrate that, and that turns out to be up to 40 to 60% of the effort, because that's what they want to unlock. They want to be able to use that product and connect it between the various components. And so you talked about how do they go about doing that journey, right? One of the areas they go about doing that is really looking at how is that product going to fit in their ecosystem, and how do they want to use the integration between those, right? And it's not, in some cases it may be using certain aspects of a product. In other cases it may be using the output of it in another system, and making sure that they are able to get the value unlocked from that.
And when we're talking about data, I believe research really plays a key part in it, because just because we have the data doesn't mean that we can just push everything to our clients, right? We need to really understand what it is that they need, what it is, so that we can custom tailor the kind of data that we push to them, and we can further personalize it. I think that's really critical for us to understand the current demand for such data as well.
And we're going there, but you're absolutely right. It's, we will get clients and we'll see in the industry, just give me all the data, right? And providing that data. So it's gone from I don't have the data to I want all of the data to what do I actually need to do with that data and what are the needs. So there's going to be a strong push for that. Absolutely.
And I think a lot of it comes back to something you mentioned earlier, Amy, is around the context of that data and actually being able to make sense of what you actually have, which is why we tend to cringe a little bit when we say we just want all the data. And I mean, of course, it's the client's data; they're definitely entitled to it, but the data as just raw data has so much less value than it could, versus understanding it in context. That is really the trick part.
Yeah,
The tricky part.
absolutely. So similar to when we're designing dashboards, for example, we don't just push everything. We don't just think that one size fits all. So we try to determine what is the role of this user, what do they need to get out of this data. So that's where we come in and personalize the kind of information that we present to them, and it gives them a lot of control as to what kind of information they really need for their day-to-day tasks as well.
Yeah.
So context really is key. You're
Yeah.
right.
As well as just identifying that there's something more here. You
Yeah.
really need to drill down into that.
Yeah.
But that's the next level. It's the starting the conversation and getting that I need to get to the next step that is really important.
Yeah, just having the client portal and being able to log in and see stuff is no longer sufficient,
No.
right? It's, I want to be able to see what's specific to me,
Yeah.
and I want to be able to change it. I think that's more important, right?
Personalization is non-negotiable in this day and age. This is what our clients look for. This is exactly what they expect.
Yeah, and it sort of ties back into that integration piece. We talked about microservices and being able to integrate at multiple layers, whether it's at a data layer or a functional layer or at a presentation layer or at a user experience layer. Is being able to pull those things together lets you build that personalized experience for the advisor and tweak the advisor or cue to the fact that there's something going on here that you need to dig a little deeper into, or there's a behavior that you want to try and capitalize on or change if necessary.
Yeah, and the clients that are and the products that are leading the industry that we see are ones that have that standardized microservices layer that can be applied and flexible for any type of systems that a client may have. Right, the custom integration they are required in some instances, but having that set of microservices library is really important to allow those clients to evolve as they use the product.
Well said. What he said.
Now, there were a few really interesting things that I heard in there, and I want to dive a bit deeper into. So, personalization, of course. Aimee, you said that it's not negotiable, right? It's become table stakes now. So before, where it was like, oh, you know what, personalization, if you have it, you're ahead of the curve, right? It's amazing. You're going to get all these different opportunities because you have it, since no one else does. But that's no longer the case. And technology is moving at a really fast speed. And of course, it's very difficult for firms to keep up because there's something new being released every day. We have all these really cool fintechs that come out and have really interesting services that are provided. So I want to dive a bit deeper into that. If you are a firm that has been around for a while and you know this is being demanded from you, and we've spoken a bit about them sitting on all this data. Now they need to start figuring out a way to use the data. But how, like, again, how does that journey begin for them, right? So, like, yes, they have to go out and start using certain portions of the data, but if I look at it from like a architectural framework, it they know they want the streamlining and the integration, right? And so that sort of leads us to that platformization idea, and that's something we've discussed in previous episodes. But really, from an architectural perspective, how do they connect all of these dots and make a working platform?
So the first step in that journey is always the creation of the capability to expose that, and that's really what microservices are about. There's another piece where you talk about dealing with the functional side or the process side, which is really stitching those pieces together. But the real first piece is start building and breaking your legacy data down into components. And we're really talking about data components at that level. So domains of data, areas of interest of data. And that's sort of how you group them in a logical way to be exposed so that they can actually be consumed by multiple things. The biggest piece is to start building out that microservices architecture that exposes your data and that you have a context wrapped around it. So that's maybe less of an actual system implementation thing and more of a data governance thing, understanding what that data, how that data was captured, what it actually means, and what are the right things to actually use it for. But it's really building that data exposure layer that is the start of it. Once you actually have that, you start layering a process layer on top of that that lets you implement and quickly change the processes that you actually want to execute. Once you have sort of those two pieces, you can start putting that context around it, personalizing it, and that's all done without necessarily making a massive change to your legacy systems or more mature systems that have been around for a while.
Right. And will that also allow you to start creating your, your connective tissue for platformization without having to rip out the old system?
The real key is the creation of those microservices. So when you start talking about using things like RESTful technologies, those are ubiquitous. You can pull them in from a user interface. You can pull them in from an integration bus. You can pull them in from a data extraction fabric that you want to feed into data lakes that may be feeding your ML and AI processes as well.
Yeah, it really provides that buffer between that legacy system or data store that you have and what you have on the front end, what the client is seeing, right? And so, to Tom's point, you by using those microservices, that is really, I would consider it the plumbing that allows you to not have to worry about the back end and make those changes, which can be time consuming. It can be very costly, right? You look at the implementations that we do now. There's a really key role, which is data science. There's usually a data scientist that's involved in that program team, and the reason for that is it's such a key component that if you don't look at it from that data perspective, it doesn't matter what you build, you're not going to be able to unlock that value. So we've seen that view of data science being such a critical component to what you need. And then the other aspect that I think, Tom, you touched on is traditionally, when we look at systems, they've been, or operations or processes, they have been geared towards what that system was. So I do account transfers, I do trade administration, I do corporate actions, common operation functions that a lot of financial services clients have. But that is not necessarily the journey that a client sees. Client's going to open an account. They're going to make a trade. They're going to fill out all of their forms. They're going to do a number of different steps in their journey. And so the ability to take those processes that were traditionally looked at just a common function and put it through a user journey is critical to understanding how you connect that to the data science. And I know, Aimee, that's probably a big component of what you look at.
Yeah, it is. Like it's very, very important because we cannot just start designing or start recommending that. For example, we need to build this solution for the client without that critical information. So you're right.
Right. So a lot of really interesting things there that we'll explore a bit more. But Tom, you mentioned having these two layers, and earlier on we were kind of talking a bit about AI and ML. So once these layers are established, and there's room for personalization, is that also the point where firms can start doing some interesting things with things like artificial intelligence?
Yeah, it's really sort of the underlying data exposure pieces, and whether or not that's a set of microservices that allow you to access that data in real time, messaging approaches where you're actually getting notified that changes are happening or that interesting business events are actually happening, or whether or not it's mass data movement that is feeding into these processes that are training models to actually be able to understand what kind of insight, what kind of correlation there is between things that are going on and things that are about to happen or potentially about to happen. Maybe you're about to lose a client. Maybe the client portfolio is about to grow. So being able to drive those things once you actually have that data exposure layer, that is the key step in unlocking those ML and AI capabilities to do all of those things.
So I'm curious to learn then, where is the industry currently with that data layer exposure?
So really, there's a couple of ways that it's exposed. Sort of a traditional way of dealing with it is, as Jay said earlier, just give me all the data. Some of the little more forward-thinking ways of looking at that right now are when we start looking at events and data streaming. So understanding the data and dealing with the data in a more of a more real-time mode, where a client has made a change, what does that actually mean? What do we think their next behavior is going to be based on the types of changes that they've made? Is really sort of where that's going, more than sort of the traditional data feeding that goes on.
Okay, that's really interesting, because again, I'm not a technical expert like you guys are, so very happy to have this conversation with you all. But the way I view it is that I go back towards the advisor and what their needs are and what they're asking for, right? And so their needs are quite clear, and we've mentioned them several times throughout the series. But again, it's having that integration and the streamlining. And so the way I look at it, the way they get those pieces is through, again, the platformization, and the way you get there is through data and having the correct data, having it exposed properly in the appropriate different layers that there are to data. But like, what else is key to getting to that platformization arena?
It's understanding the context of the data as well. So, we talked about that from a personalization perspective and a data use perspective. It's really around that data use piece. So, some people call it context, some people call it data governance. It's really about understanding what data you've captured and what you can actually use it for, and in some cases what you can't use it for based on what context it's been captured in as well.
Yeah, I often equate it to, if you talk about the platformization and how to get there, I equate it to, what you see with Apple and your iPhone, right? They have an iOS store, an Apple store, and they're independent developers who develop these products, but they're all developed to specifications that Apple defines, right? And what that does is it unlocks the ability for each person. Aimee can have her set of Apple apps on her phone. I can have a different set. Tom can have a different set. We have the ability to personalize, use what we want, because there's a standardization around how those apps are all being provided. And those developers provide very creative apps, but they're all tied in to what Apple has in their iOS store. So I usually equate it to something like that, that makes it easier for people to grasp sometimes. But I would say that how are advisors going to use that data? That's really where you're able to take the context of the data, the behavioral trends, and being able to then share it with an advisor. So for an advisor to know, typically when, say, I'll give an example of what we're seeing in the global marketplace today. Typically when there is instability, there are going to be actions that are going to be taken by advisors and clients. If advisors are able to get that type of analytics up front, they can actually proactively go to their clients and say, this is something that we've seen. Would you be interested? Right? It's that type of service and personalization that helps.
It really drives a different level of relationship between the advisor and the client, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that makes me think again of next best action, right? Surfacing those insights based on the available data. But I loved your Apple Store analogy. That definitely simplifies it and makes a lot of sense. But it got me to thinking about something else as well, which is that there's not just one type of advisor out there. There's many different types of advisors. So if we go back to your analogy of having different apps on the Apple Store, I think about how a firm can have all these different capabilities available to their advisor, and then based on the advisor need and their book of business, they sort of pick and choose what functionalities they require.
Exactly. What works for them. Each advisor is unique. You're trying to build that relationship with your clients, and so the ability to have to use different types of apps gives that personalization, gives that relationship. But even more important than that is you then have that cohesive usage data around all the different functions and apps, and you can actually provide insights on top of that, right? And so if we use the Apple example, not only are Aimee and I probably have different apps on our phone, but the iOS store is able to understand how is it being used by everyone. What is that usage data? And then they're able to provide more insights. And so large firms are able to harness that power if they have the ability to have customized solutions that are all using that same type of platform.
Right, and my mind goes to advisor analytics. When you mentioned all that data collection, we know that advisors are curious. They want to know how they're doing compared to other advisors who have a similar book or have similar models. Sort of where do I rank within that area, and if that is something that firms can provide, it would definitely be helpful. It would also help a lot with the practice management side of things. So, we noticed that you have a big investment in XYZ. Well, other advisors have a big investment in this, also have an investment in this, or they tend to do this set of things, right? And that can help an advisor streamline and also give some guidance, particularly when we speak about rookie advisors who are just coming into the industry. They're looking for that type of guidance.
And I think some of the things the next best action that that we've mentioned a couple of times, driving that correlation between the composition of a portfolio versus how those portfolios do over time, and how sticky those clients are with particular advisors, are all things that can add into there.
Absolutely. And and on the flip side of that is, of course, client analytics, right? So the advisor is getting their analytics for what they're doing and what they can improve on. And then on the other side is client analytics. So I have these types of clients. What do they value? What do they want from me? Do they want me to be proactive and reach out to them constantly? Or should I just, kind of sit back and this client prefers that I not reach out and they come to me, right? And these are all very small and nuanced things that advisors pick up on time as they build relationships with their clients. But advisors again are human. They can't do it all. Limited capacity is also an issue because they have this expanding role that we've been talking about over the last 2 episodes, where they're doing so much more than just their traditional stuff of financial planning and investment management. So now, how do you help them manage all of that? And that's where I feel surfacing insights and having next best action would be really helpful to them.
And I think you end up wanting to drive a lot of that insight, whether it's client analytics or advisor analytics, as part of those layers that we talked about earlier. You can actually embed those within a process that actually drives a different presentation from a user experience perspective, and as well prompting people that particular actions make sense in this particular context, as opposed to others where that may not be where a client wants to go at all.
Absolutely. And that goes, again, back to personalization, right?
It's all tied together.
It's all a circle. It comes back. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And it really does get me thinking about, again, different client technologies, what they have available to them today. Something that I was actually really happy to see in the survey was that clients said their technology was becoming easier to use. And so when I saw that, I'm like, that's amazing. I remember when I was in the industry, that wasn't always the case. You always had to play around with whatever tool was introduced to you a fair bit in order to understand it. So now that we're shifting away from that and making things more intuitive, I think is a great area to go. And Aimee, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
So that's actually pretty interesting because in the last decade alone, UX has undergone tons of changes, tons. So we regularly hear, new technologies. Well, they're not really new technologies, but technologies such as there's machine learning, AI. So this is what you guys were talking about earlier. there's gesture control, there's voice interfaces, there's automation, there's virtual reality. And without a doubt, these technologies have really enhanced and improved the human and machine interactions. But when there are new technologies, these will most likely than not break existing mental models. And for us, because we always evolve, we will form new ones. And for UX, it's really, really critical for us to, even before we start designing for solutions, that we have to, I think I mentioned this earlier, we have to have a solid understanding of the present demand. We have to be able to identify what our users need even before we start building anything. And as designers, and I guess it's the same with product managers and so on and so forth, we need to, have a really strong grasp of these technologies, because the way our users interact with, for example, existing or current technologies will be different from how they will interact with future technologies or new technologies. And for me, I have this philosophy: always design for chaos, because as human beings, we are prone to making mistakes. We are prone to making errors. So we have to take all of those into account whenever we're dealing with new technologies. So, for example, we have to ask ourselves, will the client be able to get from point A to point C if they missed point B? Or if we're dealing with noob or technologically challenged users, will they be able to perform the same tasks with ease as compared to tech-savvy ones? So always when talking about new technologies to enhance the customer experience, we have to take those items into account. They're very basic concepts, but we always have to take them into account.
And we've seen that just in the last 3 years when you talk about how we have moved from an in-person face-to-face to a virtual environment, right? I don't think we would have moved at any speed like that if it wasn't for what happened, with the global world and the pandemic. But that has now forced us to look at that technology, and you've seen it. That was one of the insights in the survey was individuals are looking for that virtual relationship with their advisor, and they are looking for more than just the face-to-face.
Yeah.
And I think if you have a large group of individuals using that technology, if it's not flexible, people will use it at different levels in terms of their learning. So, just interested how you've seen it in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I don't think that the in person, like I'm speaking from an advisor point of view. I don't think it will become obsolete. There are still advisors who will deliver these personalized services through email, through phone, through the regular classic or old school channels. I don't think that's going to become obsolete. But as we see the demographics change, there are millennials, Gen Z, or even Gen X, like myself, we're starting to see that shift. Like we're now looking or expecting smart, what do you call this, methods or options for us to connect with our advisors. So you're right. There's going to be a huge shift when it comes to that, and we're seeing that right now, right? People are expecting multiple channels to be able to do that, as well as our clients, even for our advisors. So I think that's one of the things that we can expect as we look at new technologies come in.
Right. And so because this is a really interesting area for me, I think that it's about time. Things got more efficient and easier in this arena. And, I'm very happy to see that it's headed there. Firms have been working very hard and diligently to deliver the required technology to their advisors and other employees as well. But I do wonder, you spoke a bit about the user journeys. So when a firm is trying to introduce these new technologies and ensuring that advisors see the value and there's a good adoption rate, because sometimes there's just so much change coming your way very quickly. It can be difficult to adapt every piece of new technology that comes out. So you'll have, certain teams just ignore certain pieces that they don't need for the time being. What are some of like the best practices that firms should be aware of when it comes to introducing all these technologies and at the pace that they introduce them?
I think they need to understand that design is a continuous journey. So take for example the light bulb. It didn't come into like existence because we kept improving on candles. It doesn't work that way. So same thing with with the example that you said. We have to put on a mindset that design is a continuous journey. So we have to keep going back to users. We have to keep finding or getting insights from them to that covers their entire experience or interactions with our product. I think that at least for my practice, that's what we do. We look at it as a continuous journey. It's not like you come up with a solution and then that's it. Or you don't, try to cover everything and just incorporate all of these new technologies that come in. You have to decide whether is that the right time to adopt this. Is there a demand for it? Is there a need for it from our existing users? So at least that's how we should approach it.
And I think one of the things that sort of rings very true with that is, earlier we were talking about platformization, where you're breaking things down into pieces that can be used independently and stitched together in different ways. Really, when you start to do that with some of the processes and user experiences that you're putting together, and don't try to necessarily encompass an entire process with every single bit of input that could possibly come in, you get that flexibility to be able to make those changes more quickly. And it's not a huge disruptive change to an end user when you're saying, I'm adding this process here in this step that we found 95% of the time you did anyways after you completed this one.
Right. That makes sense, and it's definitely a continuous journey. We're always learning, always inventing within this industry. And the industry itself has seen a lot of change, right? Like wealth management, when we look at it from a technology perspective, it was a bit static for a while, and then all of a sudden you just had like this acceleration of digital transformation that took place, and that is the journey that all these firms are currently going through. They are trying to digitize all of those user journeys, right? From everything from step one of onboarding to continuous monitoring and relationship management. And so how, again, do you do that? And we sort of come back to this area over and over of, having all these programs talk to each other, i.e. the integration, having them stitched together so that you're not signing out of one place and going to a different icon or whatever there might be on your screen. You're staying within the same portal, and you just click on something else to create a new process for whatever you want to work on.
And if every component of that ecosystem speaks the same language, uses the same type of protocol, that's how you get there, right? That's how you're able to make that happen. And in the past, we've seen ways where when this technology was evolving, we were trying to make those connections. It wasn't a seamless interaction. Now with how we've evolved from APIs, you call it microservices, there is the ability now to have that pure seamless integration for your clients, for your advisors.
It becomes more of a plug and play operation to change your processes rather than a massive business reengineering effort.
Absolutely. And also real-time data, right? So no longer have to wait till end of day for a certain report or, that quarterly performance report. If everything works properly, ideally the client should just be able to go to their portal and say, oh, generate this report for me. and it should be live data, correct?
And that's where those layers that we talked about earlier, the process layer, the data exposure layer, you build those processes in a way that they can be reused and torn apart and rearranged. You have the data at the lower levels that you can actually pull on and use and drive insight from and present in different ways that really sort of enables that. It's not, as you say, a wait till tomorrow when all my nightly processes have run to update this stuff.
Absolutely. And I guess when we speak about this stuff, the other thing that comes to my mind is around data security. So we've seen in our survey that advisors now feel secure. They're not too concerned about data security, but we know that from the firm's perspective, it's definitely still a concern. Privacy and security will, as we become more digital, it'll always be a priority. And we've seen some things happen recently, different ransomwares, that have shut down processes. So that besides those having those data layers, sort of where does security fit in, and how do firms make sure that security is something that one fits in the puzzle and two is still a priority?
So, I mean, there's a couple of pieces there. There's sort of how do you keep your data secure in such a way that it can't be compromised or used by unauthorized parties, and that's sort of the bottom layer of the cake, which is really sort of the data encryption. The tools that are actually being used for that end up really, in most cases, being transparent to the application these days. So it's not so much of a application space or a cost or performance impact on how things are actually working. It's sort of just a layer that's in place and maintains that level of security. Some of the evolution of that is as you move to that model and get to that model, your data actually has less value to someone who's actually dealing with it from a compromise perspective. They can't read it. So the compromise is more from a service perspective. As you start to decompose your product into your capabilities into these microservices and processes and personalized user experiences, the fact that you've compromised the availability of one particular environment doesn't matter because you pick it up and you move it somewhere else. So the actual attractiveness to even attack these systems becomes so much less because all you can really do is deny service, and you can only do that for a short period of time anyways because you've got the flexibility and the elasticity to be able to move that around and overcome those things very quickly.
Yeah, I think you talk about security and privacy, and that is, there's one aspect around being able to personalize, being able to get the insight from data, but the other side is making sure that you do it in a way that is safe and secure, but is also have the privacy, right? Privacy for clients, privacy for advisors. As we see this technology evolve, we've seen companies who are at the cutting edge of data insights, and they've had some challenges around privacy, right? Client privacy and how to do that. And you're seeing legislation catch up to that. We now have the privacy regulations. And I think one of the key aspects now is we go back to give me all the data. You only use the data for what you need. You don't gather an entire set of data. It's clear about what do you need, and you only use it for that purpose. And I think clients are looking for that personalization, but they're very concerned about my privacy, right? How is that data being used? A lot of our clients have to make sure that as they aggregate data, they're doing so in a meaningful way with the consent of clients, and it aligns to the legislation and privacy. And that goes to personalization. I'm sure you see it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So there are two sides of the coin, right? People expect us to provide them data, but at the same time, they expect you also to protect that same data. So
Absolutely. And so, this takes me to open finance, open banking, open finance. I feel like that's kind of the area that comes into play when you speak about privacy, security, and the end client actually having control over their data. Right, open finance, ideally, it's meant to allow a client to control their data, know who's accessing it and for what purpose, and to also ultimately provide them with that personalization. So when it comes to open financing or open finance, excuse me, where where are firms in terms of the data structure that they have, the infrastructure that's available to them?
So I think a lot of firms have actually built sort of the very bottom layer of that open finance type world, which is starting to build the pieces or having built and having available the pieces that actually expose that data. The next level onto that is actually getting the standardization of that. So as Jay talked about earlier in the Apple Store, how all those things are built to a common standard, knowing that to be able to get an account balance from one system, I call this way. I use a standard message, and I get a standard message back that has my information. The wrapping around that of the security piece is to allow the actual owner of that data, the actual end person, to control who has access to what. So that I could say, for example, Jay's product has the ability to see my account balance, but not the individual transactions. But Aimee, who's my financial advisor and is trying to tell me how to spend my money as opposed to just investing it, can actually look at those transactions and say, wow, you're spending a lot of money going to the movies. You should buy a big screen TV.
Those are insights right there. There you go.
Yeah, if I were an advisor, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I'm actually really curious to get your guys' perspective on something that I've been thinking about for the past little while, and I mentioned it in our previous episode with Brian and Melek, and that is what I'm just calling for now in this partnership ecosystem. And it relates to what you just mentioned there, Tom, with different individuals having different access. So if I think about the client of an advisor and the fact that clients are in different stages of their life, they have different needs. And usually, in order to service that client, there's more than one party involved, right? So you have the advisor who may go and, for instance, invite in a financial planner or a trustee or a lawyer because the advisor's role is expanding and they're providing this holistic set of services. There's going to be more people that are involved in the process now. It's not just going to be the client and the advisor. And so now, how do you have a system or a platform where all these individuals can interact and each individual can get the information that they need to meet that client's goals and needs?
So it's, I mean, the first real step is the evolution of that microservices model. We talked about it earlier being sort of the plumbing that lets all these pieces talk to each other. It's really sort of the standardization of how you actually get that information back and forth. So you can have the same way of talking to these components, but the actual format of the data or the interpretation of that data that you're getting back, until you actually have a standard way of dealing with that, there's still a cost of entry there. The other piece that needs to wrap around it is the ability for individuals to manage the consent that they provide for people to actually see that data. So I can say, Jay can see my account balance, Aimee can see my actual transactions, and at any time I can say, I don't want to let them do that anymore. I can pull that away, and it really gives me the confidence that the data is actually being managed and used in the way that I authorize, and that it's under my control.
Right. And so it sort of brings some of the pieces we've been talking about today together. It has that integration and data piece. It has the platformization, of course, and the open finance, right? And included in that is also personalization, which is the main ask from a lot of clients now.
It's an enabler. They're really enablers they're all interrelated, but they really enable that good, rich user experience that is tailored to what you actually need when you need it.
Absolutely. So providing clients with the services that they need at the time that they need them, and just making it very painless and easy, efficient, quick, so that everyone has access to what they need. I think that is the perfect way to end this segment. Thank you to all of you for being here. Do any of you have any last thoughts that you would like to share?
Oh, thanks, Lubna. I think we had a great conversation today. I learned a lot, and I love working with Aimee and Jay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I love chatting with these guys. Lots of insights, lots of things that, I, from a UX perspective, I can take away and just use that. So thank you,
Absolutely.
guys.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's how everything connects. So thank you for having us, and it's a
Thanks
great
for having
conversation.
us.
Yes. Thanks,
Yes.
Lubna.
Well, this was definitely the perfect way to wrap up our series. We started off episode 1 with really the business lens on it from an advisor perspective. And then we moved to discussing a bit more about the product side with Brian and Malik. And now we're wrapping it up with the three of you, really trying to get a bit deeper into the technological enablers that would allow the things that advisors are asking for. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank
And
you.
we're out.
Thank you.